Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are recording, as we usually do, Wednesday afternoon, about an hour later than we usually do. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about Jimmy Kimmel. We're going to talk about some SCOTUS stuff, and we are going to talk about the state of uh, whether whether you still get in trouble for committing crimes in the United States, at least in the at the federal level. But before we talk about that, I want to make sure you know about something else, and that is that. The website that publishes this podcast, Talking Points Memo, TPM, we are coming up on our 25th anniversary. And when I was when I was working in the history field, you talk about things that are centuries old and stuff like that. Well, 25 years, but in digital media, 25 years is a really, really, really big deal. We have watched all sorts of news organizations that came along a number of years after us that have disappeared and all that stuff. So we are really excited about it. The actual anniversary is on November 13th of this year, but a week earlier, on November 6th and 7th, we are holding a big 2-day celebration of this anniversary. And it's going to be in New York. The first night, we have rented out kind of historic theater called the Metrograph Theater, and we are going to have a big discussion about the history of TPM. We're going to have some special guests that we will be announcing soon. Kate and I will do a live version of the podcast, and at the end of the evening, we're going to have a big cocktail hour and talk and meet up and have a great time and all that. And then the next night, we are having a big party at another event space in Brooklyn. So we would love for you to come and join us. Again, 2-day event, November 6th and 7th. So what is that? A month and a half, give or take, or a little less than a month and a half from now. So join us. And if you want to buy tickets, you can just go to the website, talkingpointsmemo.com. Tickets are on sale there. We also have sponsorship passes, and those are basically tickets that are a lot more expensive than the regular tickets, and you get a few extra nice things. But basically, if you're someone who has a nice amount of money, you can buy one of those, and it helps us defray the costs for the rest of subscribers and members and so forth who want to join us in early November. So buy some tickets. Go to the website, talkingpointsmemo.com. And with that, let's dive right into the other things that are happening, i.e. the news. So let me just toss this. Kate, what do you think? What is your, at this point, global take on the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing?
Okay, I have an optimistic take and a pessimistic take. So I'll start with my pessimistic one, which is, I have some level of concern that the lesson learned from this, which I'm sure our listeners are up on, but basically Kimmel was suspended by ABC/Disney after making some honestly pretty anodyne comments after the Charlie Kirk killing. The part of his monologue that the right wing kind of lost its mind over is he said MAGA has basically spent the weekend like trying to prove that the shooter belongs to any other coalition than theirs and trying to score
Yeah,
political points off of it, which
right.
I think at its most ungenerous interpretation, people were saying, well, he's saying the shooter's MAGA, and actually that's not what he was saying. He was saying that MAGA was just working very hard to kind of pin his ideology on
On
liberals,
anybody
which is
yes,
true.
yes, yes. Yeah, it's and the actual words, I think I know you were sort of, giving listeners the gist. The actual words were even a little were more ambiguous, less, I don't want to say less culpable because none of it was culpable. But less that. And one other point is that the only thing, we were just Kate and Jackie and I, Jackie, our producer, were talking about this before we went on air, and Kimmel, I guess this is last Monday night, so like a week ago Monday, um, when he made these comments was before they released those texts about where he says, Kirk was a hater, he couldn't be reasoned with, as sort of his explanation of uh, uh, why he shot Kirk, and that is, you know, uh, it still leaves a lot of questions unanswered, but it at least makes clear that he was someone who, you know, didn't like Kirk. I mean, that sort of goes without saying. I think you could say, but it wasn't someone who like disliked him from the right or something like that. Clearly, so he said this when it was still actually very unclear what who this dude was. Now, I think part of the one of the things that the MAGA world tries to do is to create these misinformation facts, for lack of a better word. And I think that even a couple days in, the MAGA people, as Kimmel was making the point, had treated it as such a given that this was the Democrats, the liberals, the left, whatever, that was just obvious. Well, th- we didn't know that, and it's also it's still not true now. Let alone the fact that the guy himself. I mean, again, we were just talking about this beforehand, and what I was saying is that some motivation adjacent to trans rights is kind of, I would say, the best explanation we have for why he did this, even though it's a fairly thin explanation. If we take I mean, famous last words with these guys, but if you take the official story, the shooter was in a relationship with a trans woman, thought Kirk was a hater. Kirk was very anti-trans. So, okay, hate must have been about this. As I said, pretty thin, but outside of that, we have nothing. There's a kid who grew up in a super MAGA family in rural Utah, where being a super MAGA family is not, probably doesn't stand out too much, into guns, into gaming. That's the only thing we know about him. In any case, let's get back to, happier news. J- Jimmy Kimmel,
So,
you were going to say something, Kate.
so that's what Kimmel was taken off the air for, and it engendered some backlash, I think. Enough so that he was reinstated on Tuesday, with the caveat that Sinclair, one of these broadcasting groups that I'm sure our listeners are familiar with, this long kind of right wing partisan actor who's been kind of Fox Newsifying these various local broadcast affiliates that it owns for 20 years. This is old news. They said they were going to kind of keep the show off the air of the ABC affiliates they own. Nexstar said the same, which is less kind of a partisan actor move and more because they have a $6.2 billion merger that they're trying to get through Trump's FCC. But Kimmel was back yesterday. He made fun of Trump. He made fun of FCC Chair Brendan Carr, who took him off the air. And, with all that background in place, so my pessimistic view is I am worried that the lesson here for the Trump administration is just don't be like so painfully obvious and on the record about your extortion slash coercion of big media conglomerates because, you know, it was funny how there was this great right wing reaction right when this happened to say, this isn't government coercion, Kimmel's rating sucks, or, this is, he implied that the shooter was MAGA. These are just kind of the stations upholding their own policies, just like a real effort to kind of give that kind of buffer. But then you have Brendan Carr on, one of these right wing shows doing the whole like, well, something's got to be done about Kimmel, or the FCC is going to bring on a world of hurt to ABC. And then, of course, Trump, who just, in some ways, he's very good at politics, but he simply cannot let subtext stay sub. He just doesn't have it in him. So of
Right.
course, he takes to Truth Social and is doing all cap screeds about, celebrating Kimmel's suspension, and 97% of this content is mean to me, and who's next, and just kind of live narrating his like stream of consciousness, which made it pretty impossible for these people to kind of pretend it's not state action, which also prompted some, credit where credit's due, I think, stands of some courage kind of from people in the MAGA fold, probably most notably Ted Cruz, who decried this on his podcast and said kind of like, this is fun while it's Kimmel, but this is going to be done to conservatives too. David McCormick had kind of a more minor version of the same sentiment. Some of these kind of right-wing manosphere podcasters said similar things. So, you know, the pessimistic view in there, as I said, is that this will just teach them to be more subtle about their kind of coercion. But I think the optimistic view is people's pushback worked, and obviously someone like Ted Cruz might kind of move the needle more under the current regime. But I think it's impossible not to conclude that Disney and ABC backing down just days after they pulled him was due to a combination of, like, of course, elite sentiment as always, but also the reactions of a lot of normal people, who were canceling their Disney Plus accounts and, you know, making a lot of noise online and, making this a story that kind of was a big breakthrough, and in which, the corporations were the, well, if not the villains, the cowards, right? They buckled. They were kind of being pathetic and um doormats. And it's just a good reminder that like corporations are still very vulnerable to public sentiment, and especially when we're in this like current environment of just total capitulation all the time, that people reacting really badly to decisions like this does, hold sway.
Yeah, it's funny. My sense of the my experience of the progression, and I could be wrong about this, is a little different. My sense was that, as you know, as you said, Carr was like, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." I mean, very, uh, v- uh, very out there. And my sense, at least, was that in the first day or so, he and all the MAGA people were like, "Boo, yeah." Body slam on Jimmy Kimmel. This is hilarious, blah, 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 blah. And then I thought they kind of tried to get a little distance once the overall reaction was kind of, was I'm not sure the reaction was more negative than reaction to other things have been, but it seeped more into public conversations. Just because Jimmy Kimmel is just a comedian, not, there's so much of this stuff that happens. Probably people listening to this podcast know that Trump sued ABC And ABC ended up cutting him a check for about $15 million. I mean, I lose track of which is, which is Paramount and which is ABC, but cut him a check because they needed to be his friend. And that Paramount, because they needed to, Paramount CBS, because they needed to merge with Skydance and all that kind of stuff. But you've got to be a pretty big news consumer to have any idea any of this stuff is happening. And so the Kimmel thing, I don't know, it just had it, you know, uh, normal people hear about that more, and the reaction was negative. And then late last night, so Kimmel's back on air. What I had heard was that he was, kind of driving a pretty hard bargain with ABC Disney. Like, he wasn't like begging to come back. He wasn't going to make this contribution they were trying to force him to make to Turning Points and all this kind of stuff. And I think his monologue suggests that he didn't have to do a lot of begging, because I actually didn't see it. I just don't. Uh, I don't watch these shows, but the parts I've seen seem fairly aggressive, and I sort of, my sense was is that I don't know. He would have like destroyed his brand if he was coming back and being very tepid and everything. And the reality is that linear TV is kind of dying out, so it's not like any of these late night guys are probably um, looking forward and saying, "Hey, I got a career gig here. I'm going to be doing this show for the next 30 years." Well, probably not, because that's just, things are moving too quick. So I would think he wouldn't be in a begging mode. Certainly doesn't seem like it based on how his monologue went. And then Trump went on True Social late last night and basically said, "They promised, they canceled him. This sucks. I'm going to go after them again. I got him fired. Remember when they had to pay me $15 million? I'm going to make even more money this time." So he totally like crush the kneecaps of everybody trying to say this was the market at work. And I did a quick post about this morning, that I think this is great. I think the more this is an above the fold story, the longer that Nexstar and Sinclair keep him off the air. And what are they putting on? They're putting like, Charlie Kirk memorials. I don't know what they're putting on. It's every night. It's they need a lot of content. They talk about putting news content on. I don't know what they're gonna put on. It just makes the whole thing very visible. And I have a lot of confidence that when people see this, they just don't like it. They don't, even if they don't really care about Jimmy Kimmel, that they just it offends people's ideas about how the country is supposed to work. And in political science, they talk a lot about, I think the term is salami slicing, that basically when you have like an authoritarian takeover, you're not doing big dramatic things. You're doing little things incrementally over time, and no individual thing gets that much attention. And no individual thing is big enough that people say, "This is too much. We have to stand up." And this is the kind of thing, I think it just dramatizes his lawlessness and authoritarian aspirations in a way that I don't think people will like, and I think it'll hurt him. And I'm glad that he wants to keep upping the ante.
Yeah, it is one of his kind of recurring foibles that, like, especially because of his background in the entertainment space, he has this very kind of juvenile need to be like the king of entertainment. It's like one of these stupid lawsuits he's doing stems from, like, one of the planks of it is that someone else took credit for The Apprentice's success, and it was really he was behind its success. It's just, this was present in his first term too, but he's just so unbelievably immature that that need for constant adulation, will like outweigh his kind of inherent sense of political strategy. So now this has become not, it'd be in his better interest to pretend it was like the Colbert thing, right? Like it's a business decision, right? Late night doesn't make money anymore. Linear TV doesn't make money anymore. There's all kinds of ways to kind of give some neutral face to this, but instead now for him, it's like, well, now it's me versus Jimmy. So let's go. Let's rumble.
Yeah, and that's I mean, it's funny. I was gonna say, one thing would just be not to do it. Like, who cares? I mean, I'm sure it bums him out, but he survived late night TV just fine, in round 1. So kind of like, who cares? And it is it is interesting that, the point you just made, I think is really the essence of it, and it goes back to something that you and I have discussed a million times on the pod and in posts, that combat and dominance is his brand. That's what he does. That's always what he does, right? And so he can't not do it. He can't help it. But in this case, I I think it hurts him because, again, people don't like the idea the president is forcing a show off the air. It bums people out, and it seems not just threatening in an authoritarian sense. It seems pathetic. Like, Jimmy Kimmel's a pretty anodyne guy. It's not like you're like, wow, that just the Jimmy Kimmel commentary, it just cut Trump down. He couldn't, you couldn't take Trump seriously after that. I mean, what? This is just whatever. This is late night comics. They make fun of people and I don't know. I also think I'm also psyched that Nexstar and Sinclair are continuing to do this because, again, these are things that normally, all of Sinclair's stuff, the people who know about Sinclair's racket are not the targets of it, right? If you know about all that, so all of this stuff becoming more above the fold, more of a thing, I even, it kind of, I like, how could Kimmel not have a kind of like a Kimmel held hostage like segment or something like that, as long as they keep him off the air. And in Washington D.C., right? You can't watch it in Washington D.C. So I don't know. I- I'm pretty psyched about how it is playing out, and not just because he's back on the air, because of these other things too. And that doesn't mean I know it's going to go great. I have a basic confidence that people don't like this, and so the more visible it is, the better.
The other part of this story that is interesting to me, and who knows, I'm about to say this and maybe this will change, the moment we stop recording, but a big difference from in the first administration is now Trump is almost entirely surrounded by loyalists, right? Like, I mean, how many stories have we had of people appointed to these jobs who have like an alarming lack of experience to hold them? But because he's surrounded by all these kind of dyed in the wool MAGA warriors, he is so far being much less inclined to kind of flip on them than he was in the first term, where it did not take much for him to decide that some of these kind of more establishment Republican guys were to blame and should be kicked out and everything. Because,
Right.
I mean, in this case, like, Carr really fucked up, right? Like, they probably would have gotten away for this if he wasn't kind of like swinging that thing around on right wing podcasts. I'm
Right.
the FCC chair. Like, new regime, but there's like no kind of, is Carr's job safe? Is he in or out? It's
Right.
just, we're not even really having that conversation anymore. And like, the other kind of recent stuff that's been bubbling up has mostly been about, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel being like varying degrees of kind of incompetent, and Bondi just had that kind of strange dust up where she said, "We're gonna go after hate speech," and all the conservatives were like, "Hey, that's our thing.
That's
Let's
our
not."
brand. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so you get a little more of the kind of palace intrigue buzz around her, maybe, but still, it's just there's much less kind of throwing under the bus than there used to be, and maybe it's just kind of a byproduct of the overall lessened resistance to these people. Um, the feeling that you just gotta wait out the momentary mockery around these people's kind of incompetence, and it'll
Right,
pass.
right,
But it
right.
did strike me, it's like it's not like the FCC chair is like the linchpin to your administration, right? Like you would think that's a fairly disposable kind of role, but I have not, even the people on the right are kind of like, I like Brendan Carr, but that was not
That
a
was a
great
bit
handling
much.
of this situation. Yeah.
Right, right. Jonathan Last at the Bulwark had a column about this, and he said, like, was it, why was he so public, and would it have been better to do it privately? And he sort of approached this by saying what we've been saying, like he could have done this, you know, quietly and gotten what he needed. Um, we said earlier that the problem there is they don't get the win, and Trump's ego is about the win, Trump's brand is about the win. But he made a related but still I think distinct point, which was that he thought it made sense. I'm not sure if this was before it was announced that Kimmel was going to be back on the air, that it made sense because by doing it publicly, they showed they are not worried about any repercussions, not just like legal repercussions for them, but repercussions, in the way that maybe it's a repercussion what we've seen over the last 36 hours or something like that. And that by doing that, you don't just you're not just having a conversation with Nexstar, or not just having a conversation with Disney. You do it publicly, and everybody else in the business understands what the rules are, what they need to do. So it accomplishes a lot more. Now, you know, I think we're going to have to see how this plays out, because it's certainly the case. This is not done, right? I mean, I can imagine a ton of different ways this could play out. But at the moment, it looks like it kind of backfired. I mean, it reminds me of something else someone said. Maybe it was someone from like Liberal Currents or something like that. Uh, Basically, as a sort of an overall um, sort of interpretation of where we are, that yes, they're trying to do their authoritarian takeover, especially after Charlie Kirk was murdered. But they actually haven't done the legwork yet. They haven't actually consolidated their power, so they're kind of doing it on the cheap. And I do think there is a lot to that. You know, eh, everything is relative, right? I mean, just because they're maybe not going to like successfully um, sort of batten down a Pinochet type regime, it can still suck short of that. Um, but another, but that's, I don't know, that I think is part of it too. They don't have all the levers of power secured. And again, we see with this Kimmel thing that this really is about public opinion. So, that would be a plus if it ends up that was, part of the equation.
Right. Well, since we're kind of talking about the corruption of it all, let's talk about this Tom Homan story, who's the kind of ice czar. And, just from a purely journalistic perspective, this is such a story where the color just really makes it. John Light and I were talking about this before the pod, but the thrust of it is that the FBI caught Homan in a sting. This was pre him having a position in the administration, but he was kind of angling himself as I'm going to, right? So it would behoove you to kind of make connections with me now. And these agents posing as, businessmen involved or interested in having some kind of
Contracts.
border contracts,
Yep.
border related contracts, gave him $50,000 in and here's the color that makes the story, a kava bag, which is like a fast casual Mediterranean kind of like working person lunch. Um, and they were basically waiting to see, after he gets the position, is he going to kind of make good on the bribe? And I guess that's about the consequences are more dire, right? If you actually like act on the bribe rather than just accepting it. But in a totally predictable turn of events, Trump's team takes over, and all of a sudden, it's not much of a case at all, right? It's like worth, and then they drop it. And we're kind of just finding out about it now. And there was and this is kind of what made me think of it when I was talking about the Brendan Carr seeming job security thing. It's like, again, with Homan, it's like, this is embarrassing, right? Like, this is like amateur, low level, dumb shit, Like, this is like kind of the most obvious possible sting you could be caught in. Having people you don't know be like, could I interest you in money in exchange for crimes, right? Um, and the wagon circling is just instantaneous, right? And they're just, as I've been kind of following it, and I haven't really seen any, Trump sourced people talking about, oh, he's on the rocks, that was a bad look for his boss. So, you just kind of see the Megyn Kelly reaction of, we don't care. He's a national treasure, right?
Yeah, it's and it's funny that the I can't remember who he was being interviewed by someone on Fox, and he gave the key line here where they said like, "Is this true?" And he said, "I did not do anything criminal," i.e., it is true. And their defense is it was by the book $50,000 in a fast food bag. Right? So, like, I mean, well, I can't remember, was I guess MSNBC, their sort of new expanded news division, broke this. I think it's the people who actually did the piece, ex Washington Post people, and then the Times, I think, maybe advanced it. So I was pretty confident that this was the case. But I mean, it is so clearly the case that he can't deny it. And think about it, the standards for lying on TV for Trump people are pretty low. Right? You can lie about all sorts of stuff. So
Well,
it
there's video,
happened.
right?
Is there video? I thought I heard there was audio. Um
I thought
uh
video, but either
well,
way,
maybe,
there's
yeah.
some
I
kind
mean,
of, I think probably knowing that
enough.
that exists was enough to make him be like, well, I'm going to say this didn't happen. And then tomorrow, MSNBC News or whatever is going to publish the indisputable proof.
The thing, well, I okay, so there's a couple things here. One is he had a, Homeland Security immigration consultancy when he was out of government. So he was getting a lot of payments. I assume to the extent that he was ever charged with this, the defense would be, yeah, it looks bad because it was in cash, but I was providing consulting work, and any claim that it was for government actions is not true. And there it depends what evidence they had. But the interesting part of this is that why they were doing a sting, and look, he was a this happened in September 2024. He was a major surrogate for the person who was challenging the president. So the FBI would walk pretty cautiously in a case like this, doing a sting like this. And apparently how it came about is there's some unrelated case, and a witness, I don't know, maybe cooperate, someone involved in that case said, yeah, Bowman's getting cash payments from all sorts of businessmen for, to get help on contracts if Trump wins. And apparently The claim was so direct that they felt they needed to give it a try and see what happened. I'll say as a general matter, around the same time, I was hearing that lots of sort of Wall Street adjacent stuff was going on of a similar character. So, I mean, look, you you look at the kind of people we're talking about. I suspect a lot of this stuff happened. Um, the fact that they were so easily able to get him to take a bribe on camera almost certainly means those other allegations were accurate. He probably made good on the on the on the offers to help with contracts. So there's probably a lot of other stuff that also happened. And and from what we know, he still has the $50,000. You know, yeah. If there was some way to say kind of like, oh, they knew it was the deep state, so Tom gave the money back or something like that. He still has the money. It's crazy.
You are just like left with the kind of like bummer feeling that the amount of corruption going on right now is just so completely enormous that there are just whole buckets of it we're just never going to know about, right? I mean, we have these like kind of data points to work off of, and I think it was a New Yorker story that they kind of tried to do the legwork to figure out how much the Trump family in particular has profited off of the presidency round 2, and it's like billions, it's just unbelievable. But it's something I've been stuck on because some people have suggested the corruption angle is a good way to kind of take on Trump because it ties into the broader economic messaging, right? Of like he's enriching himself, uh, at your expense kind of thing. And, look at the way people kind of got uneasy about Elon Musk, right? It's like these like really rich, corrupt, openly predatory tendencies kind of wear out their welcome.
Hmm.
But I'm just so not confident that people care about it. And I think it might just be kind of a side effect of how economically stratified we are as a country now that like quote unquote normal people are just kind of like, well, that's how it is for rich people, like that they are just, we already know rich people live by different laws and under different rules. So there's just some sense of like, well, if you're lucky enough to be one of them, this is the kind of stuff you get away with.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's certainly there's certainly a lot of evidence on the table for nothing matters because the stuff that I guess the New Yorker was trying to tabulate for the Trump family. I think they're just dealing with the stuff that's totally public. That he keeps coming up with these different crypto schemes, um, most of which are absurd on any kind of uh, you know actual economic logic. But everyone who wants to curry favor comes and buys in, for the obvious reason because he's president of the United States, blah 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 blah, and he makes tons of money. And like these things are so brazen. Okay, we know about that. Um, it's just kind of a given that all sorts of corruption is happening. I think one of the big things about what is happening right now is that there is a corruption chain of events that we are all familiar with, and for the moment they have broken that chain of events because the chain of events is you're doing something corrupt. Someone finds out about it. That someone publishes a story about it. Someone gets sloppy and lets the cat out of the bag. Corruption investigators find out about it. Now it's a thing, and when it becomes a thing, investigations start, and then it becomes more of a thing because there's an investigation, and people and the people who are under suspicion sort of locked down. And so there's all these things that happen. And when those things happen, reporters get more interested, the political opposition gets more interested. So there's this chain of events that creates a follow-on chain of events. But by doing, I think, two things. One is there's no investigators. So you can publish a story, but it doesn't matter because it's not going to be investigation if you're tied to the president. And the president's not going to fire you because he doesn't care, and there's not going to be an investigation. So those things have sort of broken the system. But I do think that I think people care, but not just in a direct sense. It's not like if one particular thing came out, if Don Jr. is running some sort of protection racket, and the New York Times or TPM or someone else could break the story, suddenly people would say, I've had it with Donald Trump, he sucks, I was wrong, blah 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 blah. But we know that his public support on the economy, on jobs, on inflation are horrible, 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 horrible. And in that context, I think over time these things do matter, because you start saying, like, why is he doing so badly? Why is he not fixing anything on this front? Well, it must have something to do with the fact that all his friends are getting rich. So I think these things still do matter, but the burn time that it takes for them to kick in has either been disrupted, or the time involved has dramatically lengthened for those reasons.
So, the last story to talk about in our corruption bucket is the replacement of this U.S. attorney in Eastern Virginia, kind of a forced resignation after Trump just said to reporters, yeah, I want him out. So he said, all right. And he left. And now we have this new woman who has no prosecutorial experience, but did like short stints defending Trump during the Mar-a-Lago documents thing, and has since been in charge of, censoring the Smithsonian's. And again, with the whole Trump just does not have the capacity to be like subtle about this stuff. He's, saying and truth and, well, I want the person in this job to bring charges against my enemies. He is specifically naming Letitia James and Adam Schiff. The first guy couldn't do it, didn't find any wrongdoing to charge them with. So he's like, all right, on to the next one.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is one of the fail safes in all the things we see about, there's federal investigation of this person, that person, the other person. Um, you At a certain point, you've got to get a prosecutor to actually file charges. That is difficult for a number of reasons. You've got to go before a grand jury. You've got to, the different, you have to take steps that are normally nominal steps, but if your charges are totally bogus, they become less nominal. And then you've got to get a jury to believe it. And here they're held up on this U.S. attorney thing, and I don't know. This is another example where I do think he wants to go faster than they've done the legwork to make it happen, because I don't even understand. I'm really showing my ignorance here. I thought you could do one of these like temporary U.S. attorney things if someone was already kind of in the Justice Department system, or had already been uh, you know uh, if nominated for a Senate confirmed position and been confirmed, something like that. I didn't think you could just take someone off the street, and working in the White House is which I think she's doing, working in the White House on cracking down on the Smithsonian is off the street in those terms. So I'm not even totally sure how they did this. Clearly they can do it because they just did. Um, but I don't know. This is it. I do wonder if they're kind of a bit over their skis here. That he wants to get the really fun goodies before they have actually lined everything up to be able to get them. Um, so that's my take. What's yours?
The other oh, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the piece of this that is also funny to me is, again, going back to the theme of Trump's kind of personal grudges. Like, he's not even focusing on people who are the standard bearers of the Democratic Party. Like, I think you could even take a fair number of political junkies and they wouldn't know who Letitia James is, right? Because it's kind of like so specific to his
Yeah,
own grievance
yeah.
that it is like kind of funny that he's like spending all his time just going after his like personal adversaries, and there's not really any greater.
Political logic to it.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like
yeah.
it's kind of similar to him having John Bolton's house raided, right? Like that was not because he's trying to kind of tamp down the Democratic Party. It's 'cause, like it has nothing to do with ideology, right? I mean, if Joe Rogan turned against him tomorrow and started dedicating every 17 million hour show to like how much Trump sucks, guess who would be hit with some kind of, I don't know, second mortgage investigation, right? Like it's just so a strategic and just completely born out of his id.
Yeah, well, there's also, it's gotten someone actually pointed this out to me, and I think they were right that it's gotten less attention that probably it should have. He's also going after James Comey hard, like he's very focused on James Comey, and it's such a complicated thing. But most Democrats hate James Comey,
Yeah.
right? They don't like him at all. They I they it's complicated because of all of all the different things, but it kind of goes to your point. It's not like, if they're going after Bernie, people would be pissed, right? Oh, Bernie, our hero. And not just people who are even people who don't agree with even Democrats who don't agree with Bernie Sanders politics generally like him, right? As a kind of a just been fighting this fight for a long time and all the kind of stuff. But yeah, or, Letitia James. I mean, Lisa Cook. I would be. Was Lisa Cook over or below 1% name recognition
Right.
before this happened? And don't get me wrong, that is a righteous fight against um, uh, what they are trying to do because of the Fed and all this kind of stuff. But no one knows who Lisa Cook is. No one in the broader population knows who Lisa Cook is. And like, I'm not even sure how many New Yorkers know who Letitia James is.
On your James Comey point in particular, it is kind of funny that, I'm sorry, but if you look at the ledger, there is no way that James Comey has been more helpful to liberals overall than he has been to specifically the presidential ambitions of Donald Trump. But again, he's just the thinnest skinned human alive. So, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally, totally,
All
totally.
right. So, last thing we want to talk about is just got to do a little I told you so here to the any number of kind of legal pundits who are like, let's not count our chickens before they're hatched. The court has shown a recurring interest in pushing back on Trump. They're not just going to rubber stamp like, oh my God. That was always kind of a ridiculous argument to make. But now we're starting to have, I've seen like NBC and various outlets do their pieces of, we're now at like 15 wins in a row for the Trump administration. Um, and this newest kind of notch on the ledger came in the context of uh, Rebecca Slaughter, an FTC commissioner, got fired, kind of more of the Doge category, right? Where she was just emailed, like, you're fired. she's in a job that is protected, for cause removal. So you're supposed to kind of have a qualifying reason. There's supposed to be some adjudication. None of that. And they've been doing none of that with all the agencies like this because they don't want independent agencies to exist anymore. So they're kind of speed running these cases to the Supreme Court. And the court weighed in this week. It's still in an emergency posture, but they said her firing can stand, which is just, you know, completely overruling the precedent without bothering to say why. And then they have a little, almost an afterthought of like, should Humphrey's executor be overturned? We will consider this at arguments. And it's like, well, you just overturned it. So I mean, I guess it'll be nice to have a coda on this, but that's kind of where we are. So, in this and the next big case that's kind of in this vein is going to be the Lisa Cook one, right? Because that's the only real outstanding question here is, will the extinction of the independent agency extend to the Fed, which has long been this bright line that even kind of business conservatives are like, okay, well, you know, I hate the NLRB as much as the next guy, but we need our independent bank to be kind of stable and non-political. Um, and anyone who had any confidence about that, I can't imagine having it at this point, right? Because there's been no hesitation up until this point to kind of eliminate all these safeguards, and they've done a little bit of like, oh, the Fed is different, little like meek protestations, but that we haven't seen so far the court kind of come very head to head with Trump on something that he's like, no, I want to do this, and have them be like, well, sorry, you can't, right? So not totally optimistic about that case.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm optimistic. They did, and I think it was actually Robertson, whatever that, not an opinion, but whatever, uh, shadow docket type, kind of two-line thing they put out, where one of them said, as you just alluded to, like, well, but the Fed's different, so
Mm-hmm.
who know, let's not bring the Fed, or let's this the Fed might be in a different category. So I I kind of have my doubts because, you know, it's a funny thing because it shouldn't be any different. There's truly no rationale whatsoever for it. I kind of hope they will be hypocritical
Mm-hmm.
because just on the merits it would be good. But there's I don't know. I kind of get the sense that there might be a couple of the conservative justices who just don't want to go down that path, and they'll come up with some silly reason why they don't. But as you say, I think your overall point is on the mark. There, in this administration, there has simply not been a thing where Trump said, "Dude, I need it. Like, I don't care what that legal bullshit you guys talk about. I need this," and they're there for him. Even in that case where they in theory demanded the return of the Obrego guy. Even there, they kind of did, but then they basically made clear that they weren't going to enforce it. So there, they didn't really, you know, uh, they didn't really go there. So who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
And in the category of Trump at all kind of struggling to gin up dirt on people for whom they'd like to be smeared. We've had some progression in the Lisa Cook story, which listeners will remember is one of these kind of silly, did you claim two mortgages as your primary mortgage? The kind of malfeasance that's usually addressed like with a fine or something that they're trying to
If
turn into these
that, if that,
sprawling,
yeah,
right, that they're trying to
yeah,
turn into these sprawling criminal probes. And reporting came out probably a couple weeks ago or so suggesting that she hadn't even done that. The
yeah,
mortgage thing was
yeah,
just totally made up. So,
yeah, yeah. No, and
back to the drawing board on that one.
yeah, and it's apparently, I guess none of the I don't think any of the lower level adjudications of this have even gone to that. Like whether the actual thing is whether you get into the facts of what she did. But yeah, I assumed that there had been at least a notional error. People fill out things for you and whatever. I don't know if people saw this, but ProPublica actually did a piece where they just looked in public documents, and three members of three Trump cabinet secretaries had done this. And I don't think, and the point there was not that these guys are particularly corrupt, although they are in other in other settings. It's just this happens. And actually, there was something more recently that, in addition to those three, Besant back in 2007 or something did this. So yeah, I was assuming that at least there was a technicality, not that it was just totally totally made up. I will. Coming to the end of this episode, I will just, I don't know. I'm, I, the Supreme Court is, we know the Supreme Court's not going to put any limits on Trump, and that this is really all comes down to public opinion. Uh, I, I do think that he is impatient, and his impatience is doing things that I think is damaging his popularity even more than it is damaged, and damaging it before they have really solidified, locked down their their control. And I don't know, it gives me one half optimism and one half um you know you can be excited if you're going to have the fight in the open, even if you don't know its outcome. And I think we're seeing things now where you're starting to have the fight in the open, and that's good.
And for my optimism nugget to kind of end things, I just want to add that we have just kind of gone through a series of stories where quote unquote kind of normal people reaction has had a huge impact on how kind of one of these stories has ended. And the big one we obviously talked about was the Kimmel story, and how people canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions seems to have been a fairly weighty kind of finger on the scale on the side of reinstating him. And this comes in the same vein as you know juries in DC refusing to hand down indictments for like pretty thin prosecutions for attacking law enforcement or criticizing them, things like that. This is why Trump's approvals are getting so dangerously low in all of these different categories, including the economy, including immigration, his bread and butter stuff. And we've discussed before how the more unpopular an authoritarian is, the less powerful he is, just, inherently. So there have been a lot of wins, I think, for the little guy of late, and a sense of people being engaged and angry and responsive. And it's important to kind of take the wins in those areas as well.
Right. Right. All right. Let me remind everybody, the TPM 25th anniversary celebration is coming up at the beginning of November. So come join us in New York City. And I think that's about it for this week.
All right. See you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.